Welcome to Life Stories, where the deepest scars aren't worn on the skin, but in the silence between father and daughter. She wore a uniform that could stop generals in their tracks, but in her childhood home, she was still just the girl who disappointed them. This isn't a war story, it's the story of a woman who became extraordinary while her family refused to look up. And the moment she finally walked into their world, not as a daughter, but as their superior, everything they believed about success, pride, and love shattered in a single heartbeat. What happens when the person they underestimated turns out to hold their future in her hands? Stay with us. This story will make you question what it truly means to be seen. Let's begin. Madison Carter hadn't stepped foot in her childhood home in 5 years. And yet, as she pulled into the driveway of the modest colonial house in suburban Ohio, the porch light flickering above the garage still blinked like it had when she was 15 and waiting to sneak out. Some things never changed. She killed the engine and sat in silence, her fingers gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave imprints. In her leather duffel bag sat a perfectly pressed dress uniform, midnight blue, brass buttons gleaming, Silver Eagle insignia glinting like quiet vengeance, full colonel, at 28. They didn't know. Her parents thought she was still a mid-level officer, drifting between forgettable posts. Her brother Brandon believed she pushed papers, and not one of them had asked differently. Not after missed phone calls, not after forwarded news clips. Not even after the Pentagon sent her a commendation letter she had quietly slipped beneath her father's doorframe one Christmas, unopened. Unread. Tonight was just dinner. But tomorrow, Titan Core Systems, the defense tech company her father had given his entire life to, would be hosting its annual leadership conference. And their keynote guest, revealed last minute, was the Pentagon liaison for a $1.2 billion cybersecurity contract that would determine the company's future. That guest was her. Madison slung the duffel over her shoulder and stepped into the cold. Inside, nothing had changed. The same beige carpet with the wine stain from her prom night, the same overbearing scent of lemon polish, the same wall of framed degrees, Brandon's business school accolades, her cousin Lauren's Ivy League credentials, her own commissioning certificate, not even tucked behind a family photo. "Madison, you made it," her mother called from the kitchen, voice flat with obligatory warmth. No hug, no step forward. She forced a smile. Wouldn't miss it. As she walked past the living room, she noticed the TV glowing with muted cable news and her father's glasses folded neatly on the coffee table beside an open Titan Core portfolio. She could already hear the ice in the dinner conversation. Questions about where she'd been stationed delivered with forced curiosity, nods that veiled judgment. Upstairs, her childhood room felt like a time capsule. Pink throw pillows, high school trophies, a cheerleading uniform still hanging in the closet, but it was the drawer beside her bed that struck hardest. Empty frames. Years ago, she'd mailed home every promotion photo. Second lieutenant, captain, major, and now colonel, all carefully removed, never displayed. She changed into a simple sweater and jeans, hiding the uniform back in her bag. Tomorrow, she would not be the daughter trying to earn space on the mantle. She would be the woman holding the future of her father's company in her hands. At dinner, Brandon arrived late, of course. Expensive blazer, gold watch flashing with every animated gesture. His wife, Megan, clutched a bottle of red wine like a trophy. Brandon's been selected to lead the Sentinel interface rollout, their mother beamed, handpicked by the CEO herself. "Wow," Madison said flatly. "That's the contract with the Pentagon, right?" Her father grunted proudly. "Damn straight. Biggest deal of the decade. Some colonel is flying in tomorrow to oversee it. Poor guy, probably won't understand half the tech. Or the politics," Brandon added with a smirk. "Military types don't usually get how the real world works." Madison's stomach turned, but she smiled. "Yeah, I've heard that before." They carried on. Brandon listing his direct reports, Megan talking about her firm's latest acquisition, their mom offering second helpings like medals for good behavior. Not once did they ask Madison what she'd been doing. Not once did they ask what brought her back. Later that night, unable to sleep, she stood in front of her mirror and slowly unfolded her uniform. Each pin and medal shimmered with stories they'd never cared to hear. Lives saved. Threats neutralized. Systems protected. She traced the colonel's insignia, remembering the moment General Michelle Reeves had pinned it to her chest. "You're the youngest cyber colonel in command history," the general had whispered. "But they'll still only see their version of you until you show them who you became without them." Now the question was, should she? The next morning, Titan Corps' headquarters rose before her like a monument to everything her father believed in: hierarchy, legacy, control. She walked past the security desk, presented her clearance, and was escorted to the executive floor. Every staff member who saw her uniform straightened, every door opened. And then, Brandon. He turned the corner, skimming notes on a tablet, and nearly dropped it when he saw her. "Madison? What are you wearing?" Before she could answer, their father appeared, flanked by 2 VPs. His voice faltered. "What is going on here?" "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she replied, addressing him like she would any other senior project stakeholder. "The meeting begins in 15 minutes, correct?" Their father blinked. "Meeting? Yes," came a voice from down the hall. It was Shannon Murphy, Titan Corps' CEO, striding toward them. "Colonel Carter, what a surprise. I thought we had you via video conference." Madison extended her hand. "I decided to attend in person." Murphy turned to the confused executives. "For those unaware, this is Colonel Madison Carter, our Pentagon liaison for Project Sentinel. She has final authority on all specifications, resource allocations, and security protocols." Brandon stepped back as if physically struck. Their father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The hallway buzzed, and for the first time in her life, Madison didn't need to speak to be heard. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people who should have known your worth? What would you do if the power to define your family's future suddenly rested in your hands? What happens inside that boardroom will shatter more than assumptions. It will fracture pride, rewrite power, and expose a truth no one saw coming. The conference room was quiet, too quiet, as Madison took her seat at the head of the table. The nameplate hastily swapped out. Colonel Madison Carter, U.S. Military Liaison. The very title her father once dismissed as just a uniform now loomed over him like a verdict. She could feel every eye in the room flicker between her and Richard Carter, Director of Regional Operations, Titan Corps Systems, and her father. His face had lost its usual corporate polish. He looked like a man trying to do the math on a reality he never believed possible. Brandon sat 2 seats away, rigid, pale, the confidence from last night's dinner table replaced with disbelief. His promotion, his praise, the new project, none of it looked as shiny now under the fluorescent light of truth. Shannon Murphy cleared her throat. "Let's begin." The room shifted into motion. Project updates flew across the screen. Secure firewall integration, real-time surveillance protocols, encrypted cloud channels. Madison listened carefully, asking precise questions that tested more than just technical accuracy. They tested readiness, and when Brandon's turn came, his voice wavered. "The new interface rollout is designed for scalable deployment, with cross-platform compatibility." He looked to their father, then to Madison. "We've streamlined the login systems using biometric encryption." Madison nodded politely. "And the audit trail for those credentials?" Brandon blinked. "We haven't finalized that piece yet. You've left a security vulnerability open on a defense-grade system," she said, voice calm but cutting. "That's not just an oversight. That's operational negligence." The room froze. Her father's hand gripped the edge of the table. Brandon opened his mouth but closed it again. No excuses. Madison turned to the room. "This project affects national security. This isn't just code and updates. This is about lives, infrastructure, the invisible systems we take for granted every day. If there's a gap, someone will exploit it." The silence was so thick it buzzed, but beneath her poised tone, Madison's heart beat in conflict. She hadn't come to humiliate her brother. She hadn't wanted to put her father in this position. But this moment, this exposure, was a byproduct of the truth. The meeting ended 3 hours later. Shannon thanked everyone and made a quiet comment to Madison as they walked out together. "You're not what I expected. You're more." Madison smiled. "I get that a lot." But when she turned to retrieve her folder, she found her father waiting by the hallway. Colonel, he said, the word thick on his tongue. Dad, she replied quietly. He looked at her, then at the uniform, then back at her face. You blindsided us. I did my job, she said. You just never expected my job would look like this. His face twisted, not in anger, but in something closer to regret. Why didn't you tell us? She met his gaze, unblinking. I did. You just weren't listening. He hesitated as if swallowing something heavy. I thought I was protecting you, Madison. I thought the corporate world was safer, more stable. Safer doesn't mean better, she said, and what you thought was stable felt like a cage to me. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't know how. She stepped past him. Back in the elevator, she was alone. The doors closed, and for a moment her reflection stared back at her, a woman between two lives. A daughter still craving approval from a house that had locked her out. A soldier carrying a truth too big to be reduced to family dynamics. But as the elevator dropped floors, so did something inside her. Had she become so focused on proving her worth that she'd hardened beyond recognition? Later that night, back at her hotel, she sat by the window, untouched room service growing cold beside her. The city lights of downtown Columbus glowed below like circuits in a grid, orderly, predictable, distant. Her phone buzzed, a message from Brandon. That security flaw. You were right, I'll fix it. She stared at the screen, then another message followed. Were you always this sharp? She wanted to laugh or cry, maybe both. But the text that made her pause came an hour later from an unfamiliar number. Just heard what happened. Damn, you changed everything today. Proud of you. Also, you okay? It wasn't the words. It was the fact someone had asked. She typed, then deleted, then typed again. Not sure, but I think something cracked today. And maybe that's good. She didn't hit send. Instead, she set the phone down and looked at her uniform, still hanging in the closet. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like skin. What do you think? Can redemption between family come after years of silence and denial, or is it too late once the truth finally hits the table? Because tomorrow, Richard Carter will ask his daughter a question he never dared before, and the answer might change both of their lives forever. It was raining the next morning, a slow, persistent drizzle that slicked the streets and blurred the skyline like a watercolor that refused to dry. Madison Carter stood under the awning of Titan Corps' front entrance, coffee cooling in her hand, watching raindrops bead across the glass like tiny moments she could never take back. She had been up since 4. Sleep, as always when something mattered, had eluded her. The words her father spoke after the meeting yesterday played on repeat in her head, regret threaded through pride, confusion wrapped in old wounds. I thought I was protecting you. It had hit harder than she expected, not because it was wrong, but because it was so painfully human, and too late. Madison had spent years building armor, tactical, emotional, intellectual, but under all of it lived a daughter who once stood at 17 in this very hallway, rejection written across her father's face like permanent ink. The military is for people without real options, Madison. You're smarter than that. She took a breath, then stepped inside. Upstairs, Richard Carter's office door was cracked open. She knocked once out of habit. Come in. Her father was standing by the window, tie loosened, 2 untouched mugs of coffee on the small table by the bookshelf. For once, his desk was clear. No spreadsheets, no contracts, just silence and the space between them. I wasn't sure you'd show, he said without turning. I wasn't sure you'd ask, she replied softly. He looked back at her. His face was older than she remembered, not in years, but in a kind of weight, the kind that comes from seeing something clearly for the first time. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know who you'd become. No, she agreed. You didn't ask. There was no blame in her voice, just the echo of absence. He motioned to the chair across from him. Sit. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the seat, back straight out of habit. I've spent the last 24 hours rereading your file, he admitted. Clearance updates, commendations, that cyber operation in Bahrain. I didn't even know we had troops there. We didn't, she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. That's kind of the point. He chuckled dryly, then shook his head. You've done more in 10 years than I've done in my entire career. She looked at him, finally. That's not what this is about. I know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I wanted a version of you that made sense to me, and when you didn't become that, I shut the rest out. Madison swallowed. The lump in her throat was no longer resentment. It was grief. Grief for the birthdays spent overseas, the medals tucked into drawers, the silence that followed every unanswered call. I didn't need you to understand everything, she said quietly. I just needed you to care enough to try. He nodded. The room went still. Is it too late? He asked. She looked down at her hands, calloused, strong, scarred in places the eye couldn't see. No, she said, but I need you to know I stopped waiting. That was the truth. Somewhere between her third deployment and her promotion to colonel, Madison had stopped hoping they would ever see her, and in that letting go, she had found herself. I do see you now, he said. A pause, and I'm proud. It wasn't enough to rewrite the past, but it was enough to break something open inside her. They sat in silence for a while. The rain continued its steady rhythm outside, like time smoothing over old hurt. Then he stood and crossed the room. From the cabinet behind his desk, he pulled out a small, worn frame. She recognized it instantly, her commissioning photo. He set it on the shelf behind his desk, beside Brandon's diploma. I don't want to miss anything else, he said. Madison stood too. She didn't hug him. Not yet. But as she walked out, she turned and said, Dinner. At my place. Next weekend? No work talk. Just family. I'd like that, he said, and for the first time, it sounded like he meant it. A week later, Madison stood in her Washington, D.C. apartment, placing wine glasses on the dining table. The walls were lined with photos, some of her team, one of her and General Reeves after a successful operation, and even a candid shot of her laughing mid-training exercise. Not staged, not curated, just real. The doorbell rang. Her mother arrived with a pie as awkward as ever, but this time she asked about Madison's current post without blinking at the rank. Brandon brought wine and, surprisingly, asked for advice on a new encryption approach. They sat together, not as combatants, but as equals. After dinner, her father quietly wandered to her bookshelf, studying the rows of framed commendations. When he reached the last one, a commendation from the Pentagon for leadership under fire, he turned to her. You were right, he said. Titles don't define you. What you do does. Madison smiled, the kind that came from a scar healing over. She stepped onto her balcony after they left, the night air cool against her skin. Below, the lights of the city pulsed like a quiet heartbeat. She thought of the girl who once sat in a pink bedroom in Ohio, believing she had to shrink herself to be accepted. She was wrong. Her path had never needed permission, only courage. And finally, after all these years, she wasn't walking it alone. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your life who once doubted your worth? If you loved this story, comment 100 below. Tell us what country you're watching from. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to remember that respect is earned, not given. Thank you for watching Life Stories.